Okay, we're continuing on solving quadratic equations, and we're staying for a moment with the same topic with solving a quadratic equation by taking square roots. Now again, a quadratic equation is any equation where the highest power of x is 2. Okay, so that'd be a quadratic equation. This would be as well, by the way, because if you multiply x times x, you get x squared, and x times minus 5, you get minus 5x. So your highest power of x is still 2, so it's a quadratic equation. So we're going to keep working on taking square roots and then do a few more problems that involve practice with that. So let's take a look at what we've got here. So with this one, we're being asked to solve a quadratic equation for all values of x in simplest form. And we got to make sure we pay attention to that simplest form business. Because that can come back to bite us. Basically, it means this: don't use a calculator to try to get a decimal answer at the very end. The idea is going to be to leave it in a simplified square root form. So let's take a look at what we've got going on here. We want to get the x by itself, but there's this other stuff over here. And so what I'm going to do first is get rid of that 11 to at least try to get the x squared by itself a little bit more. So I'm going to subtract 11 from each side. That gets me a negative 2x squared. Don't lose that negative sign there, right there. So be careful about that. Equals negative 6. Okay. Now, the x squared is still not by itself, so I'm going to divide off a negative 2 here because it's multiplied on there. So that gets me x squared equals 3. And then now I need to find out what number squares to get 3. Well, I can put 3 into a calculator and hit the square root button, but it's going to give me a decimal answer that goes on forever. The square root 3 is what's called an irrational number. It doesn't repeat, doesn't go on, doesn't end. So what we're going to do is say, look, to unsquare x, I'm going to square root both sides. So when I square root x squared, I just get x. And when I square root 3, I just get square root 3. And you may remember that there are two numbers that square to get 3, the positive root of 3 and the negative root of 3. So to write that, we just write plus minus, which indicates that both positive root 3 and negative root 3 are solutions to the question. Okay. So let's look at another one here. Here, I'm trying to get x by itself, but it's got all this stuff that's happened to it. And you've maybe seen me do this before. I'm going to write down the stuff that happened to x, just as kind of a story. If you were to put a number in for x and try to calculate this thing, the first thing you do is add 9. The second thing you would do is to square. Okay, and the third thing you would do is multiply by 3. So you take care of parentheses first, then exponents, then multiplication. So my story of what happened to x is add 9, square, then multiply by 3. Well, what we're trying to do here is undo all this stuff, peel it apart so we can get what x is. So what I'm going to do is start undoing these things in reverse order. So let's first undo multiplying by 3. How do you do that? Well, you divide by 3. Okay, so we'll do that. You're not going to let me get away with dividing by 3 on one side without dividing it by 3 on the other. Okay, and so I get 4 there. Okay, so we took care of that. The next thing we need to undo is squaring. Well, how do you undo squaring? You square root. Okay, so the square root of x plus 9 gets rid of, square root of x plus 9 squared gets rid of the squaring. Okay, so, and then on this side, the square root of 4 is actually 2, but don't forget, it's actually positive and negative 2. Okay? And then your answer is going to be, to undo adding 9, you're going to subtract 9. Well, how do you write this? Okay, well, 2 minus 9 is negative 7, and negative 2 minus 9 is negative 11. So what you'll do is type in that answer, negative 7, comma, negative 11. It may create a new box for you to type the negative 11 in there once you press the comma, but there are your two answers. Okay. So let's take a look at another one here. This one has even more stuff that happened to x. Let me write it down here. The first thing that happened to x was you subtracted 9. The second thing that happened to x is you squared. The third thing that happened to x is you multiplied by 2. And the last thing that happened to x is you subtracted 43. So we're going to have to undo all this stuff, but we at least know what order we need to undo it. We're going to undo it in reverse order. So what I'm going to do is add 43 to each side. Okay, so I'll write plus 43 here, plus 43 there, and on this side I get 34. On this side I've got everything except for the minus 43. So 2x minus 9 quantity squared equals 43. Well, I took care of subtracting or undoing minus 43, so now let's undo times 2 by dividing by 2. I get x minus 9 squared is 17. Okay, I've taken care of multiplying by or unmultiplying by 2, so now let's take care of unsquaring by square rooting. Okay, when I square root this side, I get x minus 9. When I square root 17, well, 17 doesn't have a nice square root, so I'm just going to write a square root 17 right here, and I'll write plus or minus because any number has two square roots, a positive one and a negative one. And then lastly, to undo minus 9, I'll add 9. Okay. Well, what do I get? How do I do this thing? Well, the simplest way to do it is going to be write plus or minus root 17 plus 9. If you have a friend that's tempted to just add the 9 to the 17 and get 26, maybe consider not being quite as good a friend with that person because they're going to lead you astray. You can't do that. The 17 is inside a square root sign and the 9 is not, so that they don't combine properly. So what you'll do is take this right here and you'll type it in the box, but you'll need the plus or minus sign and you'll need that square root button right there. Okay, so hopefully that helps. Let's take a look at a few more. Okay. With this one, just if it helps you, I'm going to write out the steps here. What happened with x on this one is first it was squared, then you added 1, then you multiplied by 5, and then subtract 10. Okay, so let's undo all those steps in reverse order. Okay, so subtracting 10 will be done by adding 10. We'll end up with 5x squared plus 1 equals 20. We'll now divide by 5, and so that'll get rid of the 5. We won't need the parentheses anymore. We'll have a 4 there. Okay, then we'll subtract 1. We'll get x squared equals 3, and then we'll square root both sides. And of course, 3 isn't a perfect square. So we'll just write square root 3, and don't forget there's plus and minus. So again, we'll just type in plus or minus root and then 3, and then we'll be done. Okay, so we're continuing to using the same skills here. And if you don't mind on this one, instead of writing out what's going to go on, I'm just going to say, look, I can see that I need to subtract 9 first, then I'll divide by 16. And then I can add 2 and then square root. Okay, so let's see what we get here. If I subtract 9, I get x squared minus 2 in parentheses still with a 16 out front. Subtracting 9 gets me a negative 7. Okay. Then I'm going to divide by 16. It's going to get a little bit messy here, but I think we can handle it. We're going to have x squared minus 2. We won't need the parentheses anymore because we're not multiplying by 16. And I'm going to get this fraction, negative 7/16, because I divided by 16. And we're supposed to leave my answer in an exact form. So, all right, here we go. Now when I add 2 to each side, let's see, I'm going to have x squared over here. I won't have minus 2 in there, but I'm going to have a little bit of a mess here. Okay, so how do I deal with that? Well, if I'm going to get a simplified answer, what I'll end up doing is having to add these two things, and to add a fraction to a whole number, it makes perfectly good sense to say, let's get a common denominator first. Okay, you may or may not remember how to do that. there. I've written 2 as 32/16. That's the same thing. Okay? And now negative 7/16 plus 32/16 is 25. Oops. 25/16. Okay? And then over on this side, I still have x squared. So now to undo x squared, I'll square root. And this has turned out kind of nice here because when I square root this side, I just get x. And notice that both 25 and 16 are perfect squares. Okay? So square root of 25 is 5. Square root of 16 is 4. And of course, there's plus and minus there. So that's what we'll type in right there. Okay? Let's see if I've got one more I can do. Yep. On this one, let's just jump right into it. I'm going to undo subtracting 46 first. So I'll have 2x minus 4 squared equals 56. Divide by 4. I get 2x minus 4 squared equals 14. Okay. Square root both sides. All right, well, when I square root the left side, I get 2x minus 4. When I square root the right side, I get the square root of 14. Don't forget plus or minus. Okay. Then I'll subtract 4 from each side. So I can't combine those things with a square root sign with something without a square root sign. So I'll just write plus or minus 14 or plus 4. Notice I'm careful and make sure that the plus 4 isn't underneath the square root sign. And then we'll divide by 2. So we'll get x here. And I think what I'll do is just write this as root 14 over 2. And this is going to be 2. 4 divided by 2 is 2. So I just divided each of these things by 2. Again, you can't divide the 14 by 2 and just get root 7. That wouldn't work because the 2 doesn't have a square root sign on it. Okay, so this would be the answer that you'd type in to the box. All right, I hope that helps you. We'll do a little bit of practice. Of course, you're welcome to ask for help and find out how things are going if you need some help on specific ones. Okay, see you later.